The bells of Caervelith had not rung for a queen's banishment in 900 years. Myrwen stood at the western balustrade and listened to them, each iron-throated peal rolling down through the snow-locked valleys and into the throats of the wolves in the pine forests beyond the wall. The wolves did not howl in mourning. They howled in confusion, as a pack does when something it cannot understand is being torn out of the world. She had known the bells would ring today. She had known since the gray hour before dawn, when the chamberlain laid the dismissal cloak across the foot of her bed without speaking. The cloak was plain, undyed wool, the kind given to women who entered the keep as servants and to women who left it as nothing. 52 years she had worn the silver and the moonstone. 52 years she had stood at the right hand of the Alpha King of the Hollow Moon Pack, and her name had been spoken in the same breath as his in every prayer from the southern marshes to the ice plains. Tonight she would wear wool, and her name would not be spoken at all. The wind pulled at her unbound hair. There was silver in it now where once there had been only black. It had arrived the way grief arrives, slowly, then all at once, and finally as if it had always been there. Below her, in the great courtyard, the witnesses were gathering. She pressed her palms flat against the cold stone of the rail. The stone had been quarried from the heart of the mountain when the keep was first raised, and it remembered things. She had learned that in her first year as queen, when the old steward Ifor had laid her hand against a particular pillar in the sanctum and told her, "Listen, my lady, the mountain speaks to those of your blood." She had laughed then. She had been 17 and newly mated, and she had thought him a sweet old man with too many stories. She did not laugh now. The stone under her palms was warm. Snow had been falling since the third watch, but the stone was warm, and it was humming. And Myrwen closed her eyes and let it speak to her one last time. It said, "They are coming for you. The hour is now. Do not look at him." She opened her eyes. She was going to look at him. The dismissal court formed in a half-circle in the snow. The high lords of the 4 cardinal packs, the silver-robed elders, the war captains with their ceremonial spears reversed in the gesture of severance, and at the center, raised on the pale ash dais, stood her husband. Alpha King Caterin of the Hollow Moon, Lord of the 7 Valleys, looked exactly as he had on the morning he had pressed his mouth to the mating mark on the inside of her wrist, and sworn before the moon that nothing on this earth or under it would ever take her from him. He had not aged. The long-lived rarely did. His hair was still the deep pine black she had braided with her own hands on the morning of their joining. Only his eyes were different. Once they had been the color of dark honey held to a candle. Now, from this distance, they looked like nothing at all. Myrwen began to walk down toward the courtyard. She walked because they would have come and dragged her if she did not, and a Hollow Moon queen, even one being unmade, did not allow herself to be dragged. She walked because she had promised herself, in the long sleepless hour before dawn, that she would not weep where they could see. She walked because she was carrying something none of them knew about. Her hand came to rest at the high collar of her dress, where the chain of her grandmother's pendant lay against her collarbone. Inside the pendant, folded smaller than a grain of wheat, was a square of parchment. 3 lines only. She had written them by the last of the candle that morning, sealed them, and sat for a long time with her hand pressed over her heart, deciding whether to leave it for him to find or take it with her into exile. She had taken it. She did not yet know why. The witnesses parted as she came down the long steps. None of them met her eyes. Lord Pryderi of the Cinderfang, who had taught her the old runes when she was a new bride, looked at his boots. Lady Anwyl of the Greythorn, who had laughed with her over wine 3 turns of the moon ago, kept her face to the snow. Only old Ifor the steward looked at her, and his eyes were full of something that might have been an apology and might have been a warning, and there was no time to ask. She stopped 10 paces from the dais. Caterin looked down at her. For one full breath, for the long, terrible space of a single drawn breath, she let herself believe that he would see her, that whatever had been wrong with him these last 2 seasons, whatever had stolen the warmth from his hands and the words from his mouth, would crack open now under the weight of the moment, and he would step down from the dais and take her wrist in his and say no. He did not say no. He did not say anything at all. The High Elder of the Silver Conclave stepped forward and unrolled the writ. He read in the formal cadence that the mating between Cadarin son of Cadwagan and Merwin of no recorded house was found, by inquiry of the conclave, to be an error of the bond, that the Alpha King in his wisdom had accepted this finding, that the woman Merwin was henceforth severed from the keep, from the pack, and from the protection of the Hollow Moon name, that she was to be escorted at sunset to the boundary of the 7 valleys, and there set free, with the cloak on her back and nothing else. Error of the bond. The words went through her chest like a thin blade slipped between 2 ribs. There was no such thing as an error of the bond. The bond either was or was not. She had known him for what he was the moment her eyes had first found his across the harvest fire when she was a girl of 17, and he had known her the same instant. She had felt him know, and the bond had risen between them as naturally as breath rises from a sleeping mouth. She lifted her face and looked at him. She had promised herself she would not, and the warm stone had told her not to, and she did it anyway. His eyes met hers. There was nothing in them. It was not coldness. Coldness lives in a man. What looked at her out of Cadarin's face that afternoon was not living at all. It was the still, glassed-over surface of a pond in the dead of winter, and underneath it she could see, for 1/2 second, something moving, something dark, something thrashing. Then it was gone, and his face was empty again, and the High Elder asked him the formal question, "Do you, Alpha King of the Hollow Moon, affirm the severance?" "I affirm it," he said. His voice was not his voice. She had lived with that voice for 52 years. The voice that came out of his mouth on the dais was the right shape and the right pitch and entirely, utterly hollow, and somewhere very far away, behind the still pond of his eyes, something was screaming. Merwin understood, in that moment, 2 things at once. The first was that she was not being abandoned. She was being taken away from him, and he could not stop it, and whoever had done this to him was standing somewhere in this courtyard right now, watching. The second was that she was the only person in the world who had seen the thing thrashing under the ice of his eyes, and if she let them see that she had seen it, she would not live to reach the boundary of the 7 valleys. She lowered her face. She let 1 tear fall, because they expected one, and 1 would be enough. The High Elder closed the writ. The war captains lowered their reversed spears. Somewhere behind her the bells began again, slow and final, and the wolves in the pine forest answered, and Merwin of the Hollow Moon, who was Merwin of Nowhere now, turned her back on the man she had loved for 52 years and began the long walk to the gate. She did not look back. But as she passed the steward Efor, he reached out, quickly, almost too quickly to see, and pressed something small and cold into her hand. She closed her fingers around it without looking down. It was a key. The gate of Caervelith closed behind her at the last red edge of the sun. Merwin walked. The 2 riders who had escorted her to the boundary had wheeled their horses without a word and ridden back the way they had come, and the road south lay open and empty and white, and the cold was already inside her wool cloak. She walked because if she stopped she would die, and she had decided, somewhere between the dais and the gate, that she was not going to die. The key was still in her hand. She had not opened her fingers since old Efor had pressed it there. She was afraid that if she opened them, she would find she had imagined it. A mile past the boundary stone, where the road bent through a stand of black firs, she finally let herself look. The key was real. It was old. Older than the keep, perhaps. The metal was a dark gray that was not iron and not silver, and it was warm against her skin, and the bow had been worked in the shape of a crescent moon laid on its back. There was a single character cut into the stem, in the half-moon hand of the old runes, and Merwin, who had learned those runes from Lord Pryderi in the long winter of her first year as queen, read it and stopped walking. The character was return. She did not understand. She would not understand for a long time yet, but she closed her fingers around the key again, and she put it inside the pendant with the folded square of parchment, and she pulled her hood up against the wind, and she walked on. She walked through the night, because to stop was to freeze. By the second sunset she had come down out of the high country and into the marshlands, and there, at the edge of a half-frozen reed bed, she went down on her knees in the mud and finally let herself weep. She wept for her husband, who had not been her husband at the end. She wept for the long good years and the small forgotten kindnesses, and for the way he used to laugh, low and surprised, when she said something he had not expected. She wept until the reeds bent in the wind, and no one came. When she had finished, she stood up. She wiped her face with the inside of her cloak. She felt, through the wool and the leather of the pendant, the small hard shape of the key and the smaller folded shape of the parchment. She had told no one what was written on the parchment. There had been no one left to tell. She had sealed it that morning because she had not known whether she would survive the walk to the gate, and she had wanted the words to exist somewhere outside her own body, in case her body did not last the night. The words were these: "The child sleeps under the third stone. The bond is not broken. I am still his." She turned her face south, and she walked. Behind her, in the gathering dark, the wolves of the 7 valleys had begun to howl again, and this time the howling was not for any ceremony. It was the long, ragged note of a pack whose alpha was somewhere inside the keep walls, on his knees in his own bedchamber, with his hands pressed flat against the cold stone of the floor, screaming her name into the dark, and no one in the keep could hear him. No one except old Ifor the steward, who stood outside the chamber door with his head bowed, and who was the only living man in Caervalith who knew where the key had gone. The village of Brenwater did not ask questions. It sat in a fold of the southern downs, 3 days' walk past the marshlands. Its people fished the slow brown river, and they cut peat from the bog at the eastern edge, and they kept to themselves, and they did not, as a matter of long custom, ask a stranger where she had come from or why her hands were cracked from the cold. Myrwin arrived on the 4th day of the new year. She gave them the name Sephin, a soft southern name that meant winterborn, and she told them she was a widow, and she showed them what her hands could do. Her hands could do a great deal. She had not used the gift in 52 years of marriage. As Queen of the Hollow Moon, she had not been permitted to. The old laws held that a queen's blood was for the king alone, and that the small green warmth she could call up between her palms, the warmth that closed wounds and broke fevers, was a private thing. She had hidden it her whole married life. She had hidden it so well that even most of the high lords had forgotten she had ever had it. In Brenwater, where no one knew her, she let it out. She set the broken arm of a peat cutter's son on her 2nd day. She brought down the fever of the smith's youngest daughter on her 3rd. By the end of her 1st month, the village had given her the abandoned cottage at the edge of the bog road, and the women of the village had begun to leave small things on her step: a loaf wrapped in cloth, a brace of river fish, a clay pot of honey. She accepted all of it. She was past the point of pride. The years began to pass. She had thought in the first raw weeks that the grief would either kill her quickly or burn itself out. It did neither. It settled. It became the shape of her days. 5 winters passed, then 10, then 20. Sephin the healer became a known woman in the southern downs. Mothers brought their children to her from 3 villages away. She learned the local herbs, yarrow and self-heal, and the bitter bog mint that grew only on the eastern flats. And her work grew stronger, not weaker, with the years. She did not take a new husband. She did not take in apprentices. She lived alone, with a gray cat that came and went as it pleased, and she kept the pendant under her dress, and she did not, in all those years, open it. She did not need to. She knew what was inside. The mark on the inside of her wrist did not fade. This was the thing that should not have been. Among the long-lived packs, when a mating bond was severed properly, by the conclave and the writ and the reverse spears, the mark sank back into the skin within a single turn of the moon, leaving only a faint silver line. Merwin's mark did not fade in a moon. It did not fade in a year. It did not fade in 20. She watched it. The mark was a thin, curved line on the inside of her left wrist, the shape of the crescent moon laid on its back. And it was not silver. It was the deep, dark color of pine bark, the color his eyes had been before they had been taken from him, and on certain nights, nights when the wind came from the north, it was warm. It was warm the way the stone of the keep had been warm. She did not let herself think about what that meant. She had decided, in her first year of exile, that hope was a thing she could not afford. So she watched the mark, and she did not name what she was watching for, and the years went on. In the 31st year, she began to dream. Small things at first, a flash of pine forest, a woman's voice she did not recognize calling a name that was not hers. By the 35th year, the dreams had grown teeth. She would wake in the dark of her cottage with her face wet, and the absolute certainty that she had been somewhere else. Somewhere with stone walls and a high cold ceiling and the smell of pine resin and old smoke, and that someone had been looking for her there, walking the long corridors with a lamp, calling a name into rooms that had been empty for a very long time. Calling Merwin. She stopped sleeping deeply after that. She took to napping in the chair by the hearth, and she did not mention the dreams to anyone because there was no one to mention them to. In the 47th year, the cat she had kept for almost 2 decades died on the hearthstone, and Meyerwin buried it under the rowan tree behind the cottage and sat with her back to the trunk for a long time and did not weep, because she had learned that some griefs are too small and too large at once for weeping. In the 49th year, the mark on her wrist began to pulse. It was faint at first, a slow heartbeat under the skin. The first time she felt it, she thought she had imagined it. The second time, 3 nights later, she pressed her thumb hard against the mark and counted, and the pulse counted back at her, steady and patient and unmistakable, and she put both her hands over her face and made a small sound she had not made in 49 years. He is still alive, she thought. He is still alive, and the bond is not broken, and he is looking for me. She did not know yet that he had been looking for 52 years. She did not know yet that the thing thrashing under the ice of his eyes on the day of her severance had been thrashing every day since. She did not know yet what was waiting for her under the third stone of Caer Velith, or why old Efor had pressed a key into her palm on the day she walked out of the gate. She did not know any of it. But on a gray morning in the early spring of the 52nd year of her exile, a rider came down the bog road from the north. He stopped his horse at the gate of her cottage. He sat for a long moment looking at the door, and when Merwin, who was Sephin, who had been Sephin for 52 years, opened the door with a knife in her hand, the rider took off his hood, and she saw that his hair had gone entirely white, and that his eyes were wet, and that he was old Ifor, the steward of Caer Velith, and he had come a very long way to find her. "My lady," he said, and his voice broke on the word. "He is dying, and he has remembered your name." Merwin did not let him in at first. She stood in the doorway with the knife low at her hip, and she looked at the white-haired man on the worn brown horse, and she did not speak for a long count of breaths. Old Ifor sat his saddle and did not press her. He had the patience of a man who had spent 52 years waiting to say what he was going to say next. "Get down," she said at last. "Slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." He did. He was older than she remembered. His back had bent. His hands shook when he loosened the saddle girth. But the eyes that looked across her threshold were the same eyes that had pressed the key into her palm at the gate, and she finally understood, 52 years late, that the thing in his eyes had been neither apology nor warning. It had been a promise. "Sit there," she said, pointing with the knife to the stool beside the hearth. "Not the chair. The chair is mine." "Yes, my lady." "Don't call me that." "Yes, mistress." She set the iron bar across the door. She put the kettle on the hearth hook. She sat down in her own chair and laid the knife on her knee. "Talk." Ifor folded his hands in his lap. They were the color of old paper. "I did not know all of it on the day they took you to the gate. I only knew enough to give you the key and to hope that you lived long enough to use it. I have spent 52 years learning the rest. I want you to understand that, mistress. Whatever you decide to do with me when I have finished, I want you to understand that I did not know. Tell me what you did know. That he was not himself. That he had not been himself for 2 seasons. That on the morning the writ was drawn, he came to me in the steward's pantry, which he had not done in 40 years. He took my wrist in his hand. He could not speak, but his eyes were not empty yet. The emptiness came later, in the courtyard. In the pantry, he was still in there. He pressed something into my hand, the way I pressed the key into yours, and he closed my fingers around it, and he looked at me until I understood. What did he press into your hand? This. He reached into his cloak. Merwin's hand tightened on the knife. He moved twice as slowly as he had been moving, and when his hand came out, there was a small object on his palm. It was a ring. It was her ring. The thin band of pale gold that Katerin had set on her finger on the morning of their joining, the ring she had given back at the gate. She had watched the captain of the gate drop it into the iron casket of severed things. She had heard the lid close. It was on the palm of old Efor the steward, in her own cottage, in Brenwater. He took it out, Ifor said quietly. That night, he went down to the casket alone. He gave it to me on the morning he sent me to find you, and he said, these are his words exactly. If she will not come for me, give her this, and tell her that the third stone has been waiting. Merwin did not move. The kettle on the hook had begun to sing a thin, small song. The third stone has been waiting. She had written those words herself. She had written them on the parchment on the morning of her severance, in the gray hour before dawn. She had folded the parchment, sealed it, and told no living soul what was on it. Not Katerin, who could not possibly have known about the third stone, because the thing under the third stone was the one secret of her marriage that she had kept entirely to herself. She set the knife down. Ifor, that is not possible. No, mistress. He cannot have known. No, mistress. Then how? That is what I have come to tell you, if you will let me. She got up. She crossed to the window and put both palms flat against the cold pane, and she let herself feel, for the first time in 5 decades, the thing she had decided in her first year of exile that she could not afford to feel. It came up under her ribs like a tide. It nearly took her off her feet. How long does he have? Ifor's face did something that was not quite a smile. He is dying, yes, but he has been dying for 52 years. The thing they put in him on the day of your severance was not a poison meant to kill quickly. It was a slow unmaking. It has been eating him by degrees, year on year. He should have been gone 2 decades ago. He is still alive because the bond is still alive, because you are still alive. Every night your mark has been the one thread he has been holding on to, and they have not been able to cut it, because they have not been able to find you. They have been looking for me, quietly, patiently, through every season of every year. As long as you breathed, the king did not finish dying. As long as the king did not finish dying, his throne was not theirs. And now? And now the king has finally remembered your name, after 52 years of being unable even to think it. 3 nights ago in the great chamber, he opened his mouth and said, Merwin, and the 4 candles in the room went out. The men who have been waiting for him to die understood, that night, that they had run out of time. They will kill him within the moon. And before they kill him, they will find you. And they will kill you first, so that the bond cannot save him at the end. The kettle screamed. Old Ifor lifted it from the hook. How long do I have? They are 3 days behind me, mistress, perhaps 4. She nodded once. She crossed the room and pulled down the small leather satchel from the peg above the door. She opened the pendant from around her neck for the first time in 52 years, with hands that did not shake at all. The folded parchment was still inside. The dark gray key was still inside. She took the key out and closed her hand around it. The old metal was warm against her palm, warmer than it had been in any of the 52 years between, warm the way her wrist was warm under the dark crescent of the mark. The key was waking up. What is the third stone, Ifor? Tell me what is under it. The thing in Ifor's eyes that had been a promise for 52 years finally broke open. Mistress, I do not know. You don't know? I know there is a passage. I know it lies under the floor of the inner sanctum, beneath the third stone of the moon circle, and I know that no living soul has opened it in 900 years, and I know that the key in your hand is the only key that ever could. The king found out about it 40 years ago, in the deep archive. He never told a soul. He kept it for you. I think he kept it because he understood, by then, that he was being unmade, and he did not want what was under that floor to belong to the men who were unmaking him. He wanted it to belong to you. Why me? Because I think it has always belonged to you. I think the third stone has been waiting for it since long before you were born. Outside the cottage, far down the bog road, a horn sounded. It was the kind of note a hunting party blows when it is moving fast and does not yet know how close it is to its quarry. 3 days, Ifor had said. Perhaps 4. He had been wrong. They went out the back of the cottage. Merwin slung the leather satchel across her body and pulled the dismissal cloak across her shoulders, the same plain, undyed wool cloak they had given her at the gate 52 years ago, which she had never been able to make herself burn. The horse was on the other side of the cottage. They could not reach it. The horn had sounded again, closer, and a second horn had answered from the other side of the village, and Merwin understood that a hunting party which had bothered to split itself in half before it reached the houses was not a hunting party that had come to ask questions. "The reeds," she said. "Yes, mistress." "Can you run?" "I can do what I have to do." They went down through the garden and out into the bog. The reeds in early spring were as tall as a man, and the paths through them were known only to the peat cutters and the old healer woman who had walked them for 52 years. Merwin did not slow down. The cottage went up behind them about a quarter of an hour later. She did not turn to look. She felt the wrong warmth at her back, then heard the soft sound that thatch makes when it catches, then the harder sound of the old beams going. Somebody was shouting orders. Somebody else was laughing. Old Ifor made a small sound. Merwin caught his sleeve and pulled him on. "Don't. Not now. There were people in that village, mistress." "I know." They came out of the reeds at the eastern edge of the bog and dropped down into the lee of a fallen birch trunk. Ifor's face was the color of wet ash. He had not eaten in perhaps 2 days. He was 80-something years old, and he was not going to be able to do this for very much longer. She opened the satchel and dipped her fingers into the small clay pot of honey and held them up to his mouth. "Eat." He ate. "Now listen. I cannot take you to Kervelith. You will not survive it. But there is no version of this where I do not go. Is there anyone left in the keep who is on my side?" Ifor closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were clearer. 3. "There are 3 of us. Myself. The girl who keeps the cellar. Her name is Nest, the granddaughter of the woman who used to dress your hair. And one other. One whose name I will not say out loud even here. He stands close to the king. He has stood close to the king for 30 years. He is the reason the king has not yet been killed in his bed." "How do we get into the keep?" "The night gate at the river postern. 3 nights from now, at the new moon, the man whose name I will not say out loud will be standing the watch alone, and the gate will not be barred. We have to be there. If we are even a quarter of an hour late, the watch changes, and we will not have another chance." 3 nights. 3 nights. The sun was barely past noon. They were 80 miles south of Kervelith, with one half-fit old man and one woman who had not run anywhere in 52 years, and a hunting party behind them that had already started burning villages. "Get up. We're going to need a horse." The horse came from a charcoal burner's croft at the edge of the alderwood, and Merwin paid for it with the silver chain of her grandmother's pendant. The pendant itself she kept. She slipped the key and the parchment into the inside seam of her cloak. The charcoal burner gave them a thin gray gelding called moshin, the southern word for piglet, and a half loaf of black bread. and he stood in the doorway of his croft and watched them ride away with an expression Merwin could not read. She thought much later that he had recognized her. She did not know how. She had not been Merwin of the Hollow Moon for 52 years. But there had been something old and quiet and a little frightened in his face. And when she looked back at the bend in the road, he was still standing there, and he had pressed the flat of his right hand over his heart in the old gesture of the Southern Pax. The gesture they made in the old days when a moon priestess passed. She did not understand it. She had no room in her mind for things she did not understand. They rode through the rest of that day, and through the night, and through the next day, sleeping in turns in the saddle. The air began to taste of pine, and Merwin felt the first faint pull of the 7 valleys. Caer Valith was there, beyond the next ridge but one. She could feel it the way a needle feels north. The mark on her wrist was no longer pulsing, it was burning. She had pulled her sleeve back to look at it in the moonlight, and what she saw, sitting on a borrowed horse with an old man asleep against her shoulder, was that the dark crescent on her wrist was no longer pine bark colored. It was glowing, the deep, slow red that is almost not a color at all, the way coals glow under the ash. She rode on into the dark, and she said to the bond, to whatever was on the other end of it, "I am coming. Hold on. I am coming." And somewhere, in the deepest cell of the inner keep of Caer Valith, in a small, windowless room where they had been keeping him for the last 3 weeks because they could no longer trust him to be seen, a man who had been forgetting his own name for 52 years lifted his head off the stone floor. He was very thin. His hair had gone almost entirely white at the temples. His hands were chained. There were old bruises layered under newer bruises along the line of his jaw. He had not eaten in 2 days, but he had heard her. He had heard her the way a drowning man hears a voice from the surface. Distant, distorted, but unmistakable, and meant for him. He pressed his cheek against the cold floor. "Marwyn," he said. His voice was a wreck. "Cariad, I am still here." In the corridor outside the cell, the man whose name old Ifor would not say out loud, a tall man in the gray coat of the king's personal guard, who had stood close to Katerin for 30 years, heard the king speak through the door. He did not move. He did not open the door. He stood at his post with his hand on the hilt of his sword, and he counted, in his head, the bells until the new moon. 3 nights. He had been waiting 30 years. He could wait 3 nights more. The river postern lay at the foot of the eastern wall of Caer Valith, where the keep met the cliff and the cliff met the dark, slow river. It was a low arched door set into the base of the wall at the water's edge, half grown over with black ivy, the kind of door used twice a year by the kitchen scullions to throw the slops into the river and then forgotten about. A woman who had lived in the keep for 52 years knew exactly where it was. They came down the cliff path on foot, leading Mochin. The 3rd bell had rung half an hour before. The new moon was a thin, curved nothing in the sky. Merwin's wrist was burning so steadily now that she had stopped feeling it as heat and started feeling it as a second pulse, faster than her own. "There," Ifor said, very low. She saw the postern. She saw also the figure standing under the arch. He was tall. He wore the gray coat of the king's personal guard. He held no torch. There could be no torch on this night, but the thin starlight off the river caught the planes of his face, and Merwin understood that she was looking at a man who had been carrying a great weight for a very long time, and who had decided that he would either set it down tonight or die under it. She handed Mokin's reins to Ifor. She walked down the last of the cliff path alone. The man at the postern saw her coming. When she was 4 paces away, in the deep dark under the arch, he went down on one knee on the wet stones and bowed his head, and he did not raise it again until she had laid her hand, her left hand, the hand with the mark, against the crown of his head in the old gesture of acknowledgement. He let out a breath he had been holding for 30 years. "My queen. Get up. There is no time. Yes, my queen." He stood. There was a thin, pale scar that ran from the outer corner of his left eye down into his beard. Merwin did not know him. She had never seen him before, but he knew her, and that was all that mattered. What do I call you? My name is Heskin, my queen. I have been 30 years at his side. He does not know what I am. Where is he? In the deep cell, under the south tower, 2 corridors and 3 stairs from where we stand. There are 4 men on the door. I have arranged for 2 of them not to be there. The other 2 are mine. And the 3rd stone? My queen. I do not know what the 3rd stone is. I have heard the king speak of it twice, in the bad nights. He says it the way a dying man says the name of his god. I had thought, until this moment, that it was a thing inside his own head. It is not inside his head. No, my queen. Take me to him first. The stone can wait. She turned and raised her hand to old Ifor on the cliff path above them, and made the small sign that meant, "Stay there, stay alive, I will come back." And old Ifor pressed his right hand flat over his heart in the old gesture, the same gesture the charcoal burner had made, and Myrwin followed Heskin under the arch and into the keep. The keep smelled the same. She had not been ready for that. The smell came up around her the moment they passed under the inner lintel. Pine resin, old smoke, the cold mineral breath of mountain stone. And her body remembered the smell before her mind did, and her knees almost went, and Heskin's hand was under her elbow before she knew he had moved. "Steady, my queen." "I am steady." He took her up 2 corridors and down 3 stairs. The keep was very quiet, the new moon quiet of a great house in the dead of the 3rd bell, and they did not see anyone, and that was its own kind of warning. Marwyn understood that the men who had been unmaking her husband for 52 years had emptied this part of the keep tonight on purpose. They came to the door of the deep cell, 2 men outside it, Heskin's men. They did not look at her face. One of them, the younger, made the old sign with his right hand against his heart as she passed. Heskin unlocked the door. Merwin went in alone. The cell was small, lit by a single rushlight. The walls were the bare gray stone of the deep keep, sweating a thin, slow sweat of cold water. There was a man on the floor with his back against the far wall and his wrists chained, and he had lifted his head when the door opened, and he was looking at her. He did not speak for a long time. He looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he has been seeing in dreams for half a century and has stopped believing in. "Cariad," he said at last. The word came out as barely a sound. "Are you real?" She crossed the cell. She knelt down on the cold, wet stone in front of him, and she took his face in her hands. The face that had been hollowed out by 52 years of slow unmaking, and she pressed her forehead against his forehead. She did not weep. She had wept herself out in a reed bed 52 years ago. She had nothing left. "I am real. I am here." He made a small sound. It was older than words, the noise a wolf makes when its mate comes back to it after a long winter, and Merwin felt it go through her wrist and up her arm and into her chest, and the mark under her sleeve flared bright enough that she could see the red of it through the wool. "They said you were dead," he whispered. "They have been telling me you were dead for 52 years. Every morning they told me again. After a while I stopped knowing what was true. I am so sorry. I tried. Hush." She put her thumb against his mouth. He stopped. His eyes were the deep, dark honey and candle color she remembered, and they were full of him, all of him. "I have the key, Katerin." He went very still. "You have it." "Old Ifor kept it. He gave it to me at the gate. I have carried it for 52 years. The 3rd stone, listen to me. There is a thing under it. They took most of it from me, but I remember enough to tell you. The thing under the 3rd stone is the reason they took you from me. It is yours. It has been yours since before you were born. If you reach it, if I reach it, what?" He looked at her. "If you reach it, Cariad, you will not be Merwin anymore." The door of the cell opened behind her. It was not Heskin. The man in the doorway was small. That was the first thing Merwin noticed. That the man who had spent 52 years unmaking her husband was a small, neat, unremarkable man, the kind you would not look at twice in a crowded hall. He wore the dark blue robe of a conclave elder. His hair was thin and gray and combed flat against his skull. His hands folded in front of him were the hands of a clerk. His face did something that was almost a smile. "My lady, we have been looking for you for a very long time." She did not turn. She kept her hands on Katerin's face. Behind the man in the doorway, she could see Hesgin down on one knee against the wall, his head bowed under the blade of one of the 4 watchmen. Not 2, 4. Hesgin was wrong, and she understood that they had walked into a thing that had been waiting for them. "I am Varek, speaker of the inner conclave. I have served the 7 valleys for 61 years. You will not have heard of me. That has been the point." "Speaker Varek." She let his name settle in the air. "No, I had not heard of you, but I see you now." "Ah, I had hoped to be seen at last." Katerin made a low sound in his throat. His chained hands moved against the floor. Merwin pressed her thumb against his mouth, hard, and he stilled. "What did you put in him?" "Heart of the mountain, distilled. A grain in his wine the night before your severance. Another grain every 50 days for 52 years. It dulled him to the bond, to himself, to you most of all, because you were the loudest thing inside him. And he has not died. No. He should have been gone 20 years ago. He is still alive because the bond is still alive. From 100 miles away, you have been holding him alive." He took a small step into the cell. "It is a remarkable thing. Whatever else happens in this room tonight, I respect it." "You respect it, and so you have spent 52 years trying to break it." "Yes, because what I respect more is the survival of the 7 valleys. The bond between you cannot be allowed to survive because of what it would wake. Did your husband tell you what is under the 3rd stone?" She did not answer. "He did not. He has lost too much. I will tell you, because I think you have earned it, and because in another quarter of an hour, it will not matter what you know." He folded his hands tighter. "Under the 3rd stone of the moon circle lies the body of the last priestess of the unbroken line. She has lain there for 907 years. She is not dead. She is waiting. She has been waiting for a daughter of her blood to come and lay a hand upon her. The line has thinned. The line has scattered into common houses and forgotten names. And at last, in our lifetimes, the line has come down to a single living woman. Me. You. If you touch her, you become more than her. You become a power this conclave cannot countenance. It was never about your bond. It was about what your blood would do if it ever found its way to that stone." Katerin was breathing very fast against her hands. She felt him understanding it now, the pieces of him coming back together, and she thought, "He is going to do something terrible trying to get to me, and I have to move first." She moved first. She kissed him on the forehead. She pressed her left wrist against his mouth, the wrist with the mark, and she said 3 words into his ear. "Wait for me." She stood up, turned, and faced Varek. "You have made one mistake, speaker." "Have I, my lady?" "You came down here to talk to me." "I came down here to kill you. The talking has been a courtesy." "Yes, but you came down yourself." She opened her left hand. The key was in her palm. She had taken it out of the lining of her cloak in the last quarter of an hour, while she had been kneeling in front of Katerin. The small mineral man with his clerk's hands and his mild voice had been so pleased with the sound of his own 40-year explanation that he had not seen her do it. The key was no longer warm. The key was hot. It was glowing the same deep coal red that the mark on her wrist was glowing, and as Varrick's eyes flicked down to it, half a second too late, Merwin closed her fingers around it again, and she felt, for the first time in her life, the thing under the 3rd stone reach back through 52 years and 7 valleys of stone and answer her. The cell shook. The rushlight went out. The chains on Katerin's wrists rang once, a single clear note. Out in the corridor, one of the 4 watchmen made a sound that was not quite a word, and there was the heavy, soft sound of a body going down. Varrick's almost smile was gone. "My lady, whatever you are about to do." "I am not doing anything yet. She is. The keep shook again, harder, and from somewhere very deep beneath their feet, deeper than the deep cell, deeper than the bones of the mountain the keep was built on, something began, slowly, with the patience of 900 years, to wake up. Heskin came up off the floor of the corridor like a man who had been waiting 30 years to come up off a floor. Myrwin did not see it happen. She heard it. She heard the sound the watchman made when Heskin's elbow took him under the jaw, and she heard the second watchman drawing his sword, and she heard the sound the second watchman did not get to make. Varric did not turn. He had heard it too. Heskin, I should have known it would be you. My Lord Speaker, step away from the Queen. I am not standing near the Queen, Heskin. I am standing in a doorway. Step out of the doorway, then. No. Merwin did the thing she had been trained to do for 52 years. She was a healer. She put her right hand flat against Catarin's chest and let the small green warmth go. She did not dole it out. She poured every grain of warmth she had been hoarding for half a century into the body of the man on the floor of the cell, and she felt the thing they had been putting into him for 52 years recoil from her hand, the way smoke recoils from an open window. Catarin's back arched. He made a sound, the sound a man makes when 52 years of mineral poison begin to come out of him through his skin all at once. Stay with me, she said between her teeth, and on the other end of the bond, she felt the part of him that was still Catarin grab her wrist with both hands and hold. Varric saw it. His face cracked. You will kill him. You cannot draw it out that fast. It is not his heart that is going to stop tonight, Speaker. Hesgin. My queen. Take him. Varric was small and quick, and he had been carrying a thin, curved knife under his robe. He drew it now and turned in the doorway, the blade already coming up. He was not aiming for Hesgin. He was aiming, in the cold-blooded way of a man who has understood that he has lost, at her. Hesgin caught the knife on his forearm. He did it on purpose. He stepped into it. The blade went into the meat of his arm to the hilt, and he closed his other hand around the back of Varric's neck and pulled him down onto the stones and held him there. My queen, I miscounted. You did not miscount. He brought 2 extra. Hold him there. Don't kill him yet. I want him to see. She turned back to Catarin. He was breathing. Badly, but breathing. The cold mineral weight that had lived in his chest for 52 years was thinning. The thing under the floor of the keep stopped holding its breath and started to come up. The walls of the cell began to glow, the same deep coal red as the key. Lines of red appeared in the bare gray stones, faint at first, and then stronger, tracing the shapes of runes that had been cut into those stones 900 years ago and plastered over and forgotten. Merwin read them. The runes said, Daughter, we have been waiting. Come up. She drew her right hand back. He was going to keep breathing. The mineral was not all out of him. That would take time, and there were things they had done to him in the last 3 weeks that would take more than warmth between 2 palms to undo. But the worst was out. She pressed the key into his chained hand and closed his fingers around it. Hold this for me. A quarter of an hour. I am coming back. Cariad, don't go up there alone. I am not going alone. Hesgin, stay with him. Both of them. If anyone but me comes through that door, anyone, including a man you know, you kill them, and then put your back against the wall and wait for me. Yes, my queen. Catarin. Cariad. I love you. I know. I have always known. She walked out of the cell. She walked up 2 corridors and 3 stairs. The keep was no longer empty. There were people in the corridors, guards, servants, lords in night robes, and they saw her walking past, and not one of them moved to stop her. She found out later, from Hesgain, what they had been seeing. An old woman in a plain wool cloak walking down the center of the hall, and at the same time, a younger woman with black unsilvered hair walking inside her, and at the same time, again something older, a tall, pale shape with long hands. Every living soul in the hall had gone down on their knees on the stones. Myrwin felt none of it. She felt only the thing under the floor coming up to meet her. She came to the door of the inner sanctum. It was a round room under a high stone dome, paved with a circle of pale stones, 12 of them, set in a ring around a central altar. She had stood inside it a dozen ceremonial nights of her marriage. She had never looked closely at the third stone. She looked at it now, unremarkable, pale, like its 11 sisters, set flush with the floor. There was a single rune cut into it, so worn it was almost not there. The rune said return, the same rune that was cut into the bow of the key. Myrwin knelt and put both palms flat against the third stone. The stone was warm. The stone said, "Daughter, lift me." She lifted it. She did not need the key. The key had not been the key to the stone. The key had been the key to her, to the part of her that had been sealed since before her birth, and she had turned it on herself in the deep cell when she had laid her glowing left hand against her husband's chest. The stone now lifted as easily as a lid from a jar. The passage was beneath, a small round chamber, no larger than her cottage in Brenwater, with a single white stone bier in its center. On the bier lay a woman. She was very old, very tall. Her hair was the color of moonlight on snow. Her hands were folded across her chest, and the long bones of her face were the long bones of Merwin's grandmother, who had been a peat cutter's daughter from the southern downs, and the long bones of Merwin's mother, who had died of a fever when Merwin was 9, and the long bones of Merwin herself. The woman on the bier opened her eyes. They were Merwin's eyes. "Daughter, you took your time. I am sorry, I did not know." "No, they were thorough. Come down, daughter. Lay your hand upon mine. We have a great deal of work to do, and the night is not long." Merwin climbed down. She laid her right hand upon the folded hands of the woman on the bier. The bond at her left wrist met the older bond under her right hand, the bond of blood, the bond of the unbroken line, the bond that had been waiting 9 centuries for a daughter to come home, and the two of them, blood bond and mate bond, twisted together inside her chest like 2 ropes braiding into one. The keep above her went very quiet. The runes in every wall of every room of Caer Velith burned bright red and then, slowly, faded to silver. In the deep cell, Cadarin drew his first full breath in 52 years. In the chamber under the third stone, the priestess closed her hand around Myrwin's and smiled and was gone. She did not vanish. She was simply not there anymore. She had given Merwin what she had been holding for 900 years, and the giving had used her up. Merwin stood up. She climbed the short stair. She lowered the third stone back into its place behind her, gently, the way you close the door on a sleeping child. Then she walked back to fetch her husband. Cadarin was on his feet when she came back. He should not have been. A man who had taken 52 years of Heart of the Mountain and had had the worst of it pulled out of him in less than a quarter of an hour should not have been on his feet for a week. But he was on his feet because she was the queen, and his queen had walked back into a room where he was, and there was no version of him that would not have stood up to meet her. Hesgin had taken the chains off him. Hesgin was sitting on the small mineral man's back against the wall. "Cariad," Cadarin said. "Cadarin." He was looking at the same woman who had walked out of the cell and at someone else inside her. She could see him seeing it. It did not frighten him. He smiled. "You are bigger. I am the same size. You are bigger, Cariad. I am also still myself. Yes, that I can see." She crossed the cell and put her hands on his face. There was still mineral in him, a great deal, but the bond was clean for the first time in 52 years. "We have to go up, now." "I know. I have been making lists of them in the dark for 52 years. The 4 of them, the king, the queen, the watchman, and the small mineral man between them, went up out of the deep cell. The first guard captain who came down to challenge them got past 3 words before Cadarin, the Alpha King of the Hollow Moon, who had been chained for 3 weeks and shaking with mineral poison for 52 years, hit him under the jaw with the heel of his palm so fast that Merwin did not see his hand move. The captain went backwards down the stair. The three men behind him hesitated, looked past Katerin at Merwin, saw what was walking inside her, and went down on one knee. By the time they reached the great hall, there were 9 of them. By the time they reached the upper colonnade, there were 20. The runes in the walls had faded from red to silver, and the silver was bright, and the silver was seen. They found the rest of the conclave in the upper chamber. 6 men in dark blue robes, who had been waiting since the keep had begun to shake. The eldest, Lord Cindelin of the Eastern Marches, opened his mouth to speak. Merwin raised her left hand. She did not say anything. The mark on her wrist was a clear, bright silver now, the moonlight silver of a thing that has come home. And Lord Cindelin looked at it, closed his mouth, and sat down without being told to. The other 4 sat down without being told to either. Hesgen lowered Varric into the 6th chair. Katerin went to the high seat at the head of the chamber. He did not sit. Cariad, this is your judgment, not mine. They took you first. They took you longest. The seat is yours tonight, if you will have it. She thought about it. No, it is yours, husband. It has always been yours. I have other work. She turned to the 6 men. Heart of the mountain is in every one of you, maintaining doses. You have been dosing yourselves for 40 years against the bond, against me. You did it so that you could sleep at night. I am going to draw it out of you, all 6, tonight, in this room, before my husband passes judgment. I want you to feel every grain of every dose you ever administered. I want you to feel 52 years of it in the next quarter of an hour. Varric spoke for the first time since the cell. His voice was very thin. My lady, that will kill us. Yes, I know. She walked into the center of the chamber, opened her hands, and the warmth she had hoarded for 52 years went out of her in a clean, flat circle. And it found, in each of the 6 men, the thing they had been hiding inside themselves, and it began gently to take it out. It took the rest of the night. Lord Cindelin wept silently for the last hour. The youngest screamed once and was quiet. Varric did not weep. He sat with his clerk's hands folded in his lap, watching her work, and at the very end he looked at Katerin. My king, I am sorry. I know, I forgive you. It will not save you, but I forgive you. Varric closed his eyes. He did not open them again. By the time the sun came up over the 7 valleys, the inner conclave of Caer Velith was 6 dead men in 6 chairs. Myrwen was kneeling on the floor with her forehead against her husband's knee. She was finally weeping. He had his hand on her hair. He let her weep. He had been waiting 52 years to let her weep against his knee, and he was not going to hurry her. When she was finished, he bent down and kissed her. Cariad, come home. They did not, in the end, kill the rest of them. There were perhaps 60 men in the keep who had gone along with the unmaking, year after year. Katerin had the names of every one of them. He read the list aloud in the great hall the next morning, from memory, without a writ, and when he had finished, the hall waited for the sentence. There was no sentence. Not the kind they were waiting for. You will live, all of you. My queen has asked it of me, and she is wiser than I am, and she is right. The thing you fed me for 52 years killed 6 men last night. It would be a poor justice to kill 60 more. You will live, and you will leave the 7 valleys before the next moon, and you will not come back. And your names, every one of them, will be cut into the southern wall of this keep, in plain letters in the common tongue, so that any child in any year who asks what was done at Caer Velith in the time of the Alpha King and his queen may go and read them, and remember. There was a long silence. Then Lord Pryderi of the Cinderfang, the same Pryderi who had taught Myrwen the half-moon hand in her first winter as queen, went down on his knees in the middle of the hall and began to weep. It was the harder sentence. They all understood that. Pryderi came to her on the morning of his leaving. She gave him audience in a small side room off the kitchen passage. My queen, the half-moon hand, the runes I taught you in your first winter, were they part of it? I cannot remember whether the man who taught you those runes was your friend or your jailer, and I have to know because I am going to have to carry whichever one he was for the rest of my life. Merwin looked at him. You were my friend, Pryderi, in the first winter. That part was real. The mineral came later. It did not eat the friend. It ate the rest of you, but it did not eat the friend. Because the friend was finished and put away in a drawer, and the men who put the mineral in your wine did not bother to dig him out. He was still in there the whole time. He is in there now. Pryderi closed his eyes. Thank you, my queen. He went. The keep took a long time to come back to itself. The deep cell was walled up, the door bricked over, so that no one would ever again be kept in that room. The third stone, in the inner sanctum, was warm to the touch now, and would remain warm for as long as there was a daughter of the line in the keep. There was, also, the matter of old Efor. Merwin made him sit down in the small kitchen-side room and told him plainly that he was not going to last very many more winters. Ifor laughed. It was the first time she had ever heard him laugh. My lady, I have known I was not going to last many more winters since I was 63. I am not afraid, but if you want to be useful to me in the time I have left, you will let me sit by your fire in the evenings, and you will let me hold whichever of your children comes to me first, and you will not ask me to be steward of this keep any more, because I am tired. She let him be tired. She gave the steward's keys to Hesgin, and Hesgin was steward of Caer Velith for the next 31 years, and a better steward the keep had not had in 100. Old Ifor sat by the fire in the queen's small parlor, and he held the children when they came, and he died on a quiet autumn afternoon in the 7th year of the new reign, with the queen's hand on his hand, and he was buried under a rowan tree in the inner garden, a rowan grown from a cutting Myrwin had brought up out of Brenwater. He was the only man in the 7 valleys, at the end, who had known the whole story from the beginning. He had carried it for 52 years, and then for 7 more, and when he set it down gently, and he was glad to. There were 3 children in the end. The first came in the 4th year of the new reign, a son, dark-haired like his father, and with his mother's slow, careful hands. The second came in the 7th year, a daughter. Born on the same afternoon old Ifor died, so that the queen's hand was on Ifor's hand at one bell, and on the new child's small shoulder at the next. The third came in the 18th year, a surprise to everyone including the queen, and was a daughter also, born on the warm, pale stone of the inner sanctum during a moon circle ceremony, with her father's hands under her, and that daughter was the one who eventually took up the warmth of the priestess line after her mother set it down. But that was much later. In the meantime, there was, mostly, the ordinary work of being 2 people who had lost each other for 52 years and had finally been given the rest of their lives to be foolish about it together. Katerin was foolish in small ways. He brought her, in the 2nd spring of the new reign, the first bog mint from the eastern flats of Brenwater, which he had ridden 3 days south to gather himself. He learned, slowly and badly, how to braid her hair the way she had braided his on the morning of their first joining. His hands were too large, the braids were always crooked, and she never let anyone fix them. He had a small habit also, which she did not notice for nearly a year, of always coming round to her side of any room they were in together before he sat down, and pressing his hand briefly against her left wrist, against the silver crescent, before he took his seat. She asked him about it eventually. He looked at her, surprised. Cariad, I lost you for 52 years. Do you really think I am going to sit down in a room without touching you first ever again? She did not have an answer for that. She put her own hand over his, and held it there, and he sat down beside her, and the 2 of them were quiet for a long time in the firelight, and that was the answer. In the 34th year of the new reign, on a clear spring evening, the Alpha King and his queen rode south together. Alone. Hesgin had wanted to send an escort, but Myrwin had finally settled it by saying that the 2 of them had ridden into Caer Velith alone 34 years ago, with one half-fit old man and a borrowed horse, and that the 7 valleys would survive a quiet southern ride too. They came on the 3rd evening to the bog road outside Brenwater. The village had been rebuilt. Merwin had seen to that, in the second year of the new reign. The cottages that had burned on the night of the hunting party had been raised again, and the names of the 11 villagers who had died had been cut into a low stone wall at the head of the bog road. It had been her first act as queen. They stopped at the wall. Merwin read the 11 names. Cadarin waited. "I would like to see the cottage." "Yes, Cariad." The new cottage was on the same place. The thatch was new, and there was— Merwin saw it before she had quite reined the horse in— a rowan tree at the far edge of the garden, the same rowan tree she had buried the cat under on a cold autumn afternoon. A wave of something went through her so close to grief and so close to joy that she could not, for a long moment, tell which one it was. A woman came out of the cottage, perhaps 40 years old, her hair tied back, her hands stained green from a poultice. She looked at the two riders, did not at first recognize them, then did and went very still. "Oh," she said. "Oh." Merwin dismounted and came up the path slowly. She was 103 years old by the count, though she looked perhaps 50. "Are you the healer here?" "Yes, mistress." "What is your name?" "Linos, mistress." "Linos. Your grandmother was Era, who left honey on my step in my first winter here." The woman's hand went to her mouth. "My queen. I am not today. Today I am Sephin. May I sit under the rowan?" Linos opened the gate, and Merwin the queen and Cadarin the Alpha King sat together on the bench under the rowan tree, and Linos brought them tea, small beer for the king, bog mint for the queen, because Linos had remembered that her grandmother had always said the queen took bog mint. Merwin looked at the small mound of earth under the rowan where she had buried the grey cat 39 years before. There was a small, pale stone at the head of it that she had not put there, that someone in the long years between had put there for her. She did not weep. She took her husband's hand. "Cadarin, I want to tell you something I have never told you. I wrote 3 lines, on the morning of my severance, on a square of parchment. I sealed them inside the pendant. I carried them for 52 years. The parchment is in a drawer in our bedchamber now, still folded, still sealed." "What did you write, Cariad?" She told him in 3 quiet sentences. "The child sleeps under the 3rd stone. The bond is not broken. I am still his." Cadarin was quiet for a long time. "Cariad, you knew." "I did not know. I did not let myself know. I only wrote what was true, in the dark before dawn, when I did not think I would live the day. I think she had been calling me my whole life, from under the floor. I think on the morning of the severance I was tired enough and frightened enough that I finally heard her, and I wrote down what she had been saying, and I sealed it, and I carried it back to her." Cadarin pressed his thumb against the silver crescent on her wrist. "Then they did not steal you from me, Cariad. Not really. You were never only mine to steal. You were her daughter long before you were my wife. They thought they were taking a queen out of a keep. They were taking a priestess out of the only place where she could finish becoming herself. They sent you out into a bog, and the bog finished raising you, and you came back to me whole." She thought about it. "Yes, I think that is right." She laughed. The same laugh she had laughed in her first year as queen, when old Ifor had told her that the mountains spoke to those of her blood, and she had thought him a sweet old man with too many stories. She had laughed at him then, and she had been wrong, and she was laughing now, and she was not wrong, and the 2 laughs met in her chest and settled, finally, as the same laugh. The sun went down over Brenwater. The healer Linos remembered, for the rest of her life, that there had been a moment, just at the very end, when the dark had been almost full and the first stars had been coming out, when she had looked at the 2 old people on the bench, and she had not been able to tell for 1/2 second which one was the king, and which one was the queen, and which one was something else entirely. Then the moment passed, and there were 2 again, and the 2 were holding hands. They rode home the next morning, in the full spring light, with the bog mint just coming up green along the bog road and the curlews calling out on the flats. The bells of Caer Velith rang for them when they came through the gate. They were not the iron-throated bells of severance. They were the lighter bells of the old welcomes, the bells that had not been rung at that gate in 100 years, and the wolves of the 7 valleys answered them from the pine forests beyond the wall. And this time the wolves did not howl in confusion. They howled because their queen had come home. She had been coming home, in a sense, for 52 years. She was home now,